Here's a sample of what you'll hear on this episode of Natural Health Matters. So I'm not saying that we need to stop eating vegetables altogether. I think that would be a mistake as well. Now, let me say this. If you are in extraordinary health, you have the ideal weight going on, you have great energy, great mood, you have no trouble sleeping, your mental cognition is where it needs to be, you're aging gracefully, you have great libido, you're enjoying physical activity, and when you do work out, you recover quickly. If all that's going on, man, you don't need a thing. You don't need my help. You're doing great. Keep doing what you're doing. But if you're someone that has some kind of a health challenge, particularly if it's a chronic one that the medical community has not been able to help you with, you may want to consider the idea that vegetables are not the universal health foods that we've been told. There are problems associated with a plant-based diet, and vegetable consumption could be contributing to your issues. So the bottom line here is plant-based versus animal-based, which is better? Well, I think you know what I'm about to say. Welcome to the Natural Health Matters podcast, where it's all about maximizing your health potential so that you can look and feel your best at any age. I'm your host, David Sandstrom, naturopathic doctor and biblical health coach and certified nutritional counselor, and this is episode number 138. Well, as you probably noticed, I'm doing another solo episode today. And as I announced last week, I'm going to be doing more solo episodes moving forward. There's a lot of information that I simply want to share, and I really enjoy having guests on the show, and they add a lot of another dimension to the show. But I think it's time that I talked about some of the things that I'm passionate about, and one of them is nutrition. So I'm going to continue here with the plant-based versus animal-based diet, which is better. This is part 2 of an Ask Me Anything episode that we started last time in episode 137. And I had a question from a listener by the name of Jeff. And Jeff's question was about what he should be eating for heart health. So just in case you haven't heard that episode, I'm going to play Jeff's question right now.
Hey, David, my name is Jeff. I really enjoy your podcast. Wanted to reach out to you. I have a question on nutrition. Haven't heard you talk about nutrition in a while. So I wanted to bounce this off you. I had open heart surgery a few years ago. And of course, I had high cholesterol. So I've heard that being a vegetarian, which made sense to me since there's no cholesterol in vegetables, was the way to go. However, I'm hearing some other advice that that's not necessarily true. So I wanted to reach out thinking that you're an expert on this kind of thing. So I was hoping you could give me some advice. I've heard about the carnivore diet and other things too. So what would be a man that's now in his early 60s looking to change his diet for health, especially to limit the clogging of my arteries? So look forward to hearing from you. And again, I really enjoy your podcast. Keep it up. Thanks so much.
All right, Jeff, thank you for that question. That's a really good question. And I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that have a similar question. And, I get this question very often. When people hear that I'm into health and wellness, they assume that I'm a vegetarian, or they ask me if I'm plant-based or not. And I have to tell them, no, I'm not. And a lot of times they'll look at me funny, like, well, then you're not really into health then if you're not eating vegetarian. And well, that's just not the case. And I'm trying to give you some reasons why I eat the way I do with these 2 episodes. So I know we're doing kind of a deep dive here, doing 2 episodes on one question, but I just wanted to kind of clear the air on this and let everyone know, let the Natural Nation, you, the listener, know where I stand on this. And by the way, if you have a question you'd like me to tackle on a future episode, go to my website, davidsandstrom.com/AMA, and that stands for Ask Me Anything. And click on the button there. You can leave me a voice message, and I'll do my best to answer your question on a future episode. Might even do the same thing we're doing with Jeff here and create a whole episode for it. So anyway, in the last episode, it was episode 137. If you haven't listened to it, that's okay. This is a standalone episode. But if you are interested in this topic, you may want to go back and listen to episode 137. On that episode, I talked about how human beings are designed to be omnivores, and there are problems associated with extreme forms of any diet. And that includes extreme ends of the plant-based equation as well as the animal-based equation. I don't believe that veganism is the healthiest way to go. And I don't believe that carnivore or zero carb is the way to go either. So we should be landing somewhere in the middle of that. And I want to give you some reasons why I say that. In the last episode, we talked about how cholesterol is not the enemy that we've been led to believe. And we talked about some of the nutrient deficiencies that can develop with either form of plant based or animal based diet. We focused in on the fat soluble vitamins A and D and vitamin B12, as well as that can come about as a result of vegetarianism, and how I lean towards an animal based diet because animal based products, for the most part, are more nutrient dense and those nutrients are more bioavailable. So we talked about all that in the last episode 137. If you're interested, go check that out. You don't have to do that right now. You can listen to this episode first. That's fine. But if this is a topic that interests you, I encourage you to go ahead and listen. So in this episode, we're going to be talking about plant defense chemicals and protein deficiencies that can develop with a plant-based diet. And I'm going to be addressing the question or the objection of why so many people advocate a plant based diet and what's wrong with the science behind those recommendations. And at the end of the episode here, I'm going to be getting into my specific recommendations as to what I think we should be eating. So, anyway, let's get started with the plant toxins. So, plant toxins are also called anti nutrients. Now, in the wild, an animal can defend itself. If it's being chased by a predator, a squirrel can run up a tree, climb a tree, a rabbit can jump into its hole. Animals have the ability to move around as a form of defense to keep them from being attacked by predators. And plants are stuck in the ground. They can't move, they don't have that ability. So, how does a plant defend itself in the wild? Well, one of the ways they do that is through thorns, right? Thorns will discourage animals from getting close to that plant or eating it. But not all plants have thorns, right? So, how do they defend themselves? How do they keep from going extinct? Well, plants have God put in there the ability to create chemical defenses. And those chemicals act as natural pesticides that when an insect or an animal consumes that plant chemical, they'll feel sick. And when they get sick, they're going to avoid that plant in the future. So that's how plants defend themselves and preserve the preservation of the species is accomplished. That's God's design. So, plants, we've been told, vegetables, are part of a healthy diet, and they are, but there's some problems associated with that. And I don't think plants should be our staples, but they're part of what we should be consuming. But we have to be, I want you to be aware of some of the issues associated with consuming these plant chemicals. One of the more common plant chemicals are lectins. It's a category of defense chemicals, and it's ubiquitous in all kinds of vegetables. And lectins interfere with the absorption of calcium, iron, phosphorus, and zinc. And there was a study done, it's very interesting. It was published in the Journal of Laboratory and Clinical Medicine. And they took the highest source of zinc that they could find, and that is oysters. And they fed people just plain oysters. And then they measured the plasma zinc concentrations 3 hours later. That's in the blood. And after the oysters, their zinc concentrations increased dramatically. And then they had those same people eat oysters along with beans, which are a legume. And the zinc concentrations 3 hours later were significantly less. And then they had a third round, and they had people eat oysters with tortilla chips. And when they did that, the zinc concentrations 3 hours later in their plasma was nearly zero. It was a significant reduction in the absorption of the zinc. So, what was going on? The lectins in the legumes and the grain, which was corn in this case, attached itself chemically to the zinc, preventing the body from absorbing that zinc. So, it just gets passed through the body instead of being utilized the way it needs to be. So, foods that have a lot of lectins are whole grains, especially wheat, legumes, which includes beans, peanuts, and soybeans, the nightshade family, which includes tomatoes, potatoes, peppers, and eggplant. And that's such an important topic. I'm going to be devoting a whole episode to this down the road on how we can avoid lectins by selecting foods properly and how to prepare those foods and consume them so we can minimize our lectin intake. So another family of plant chemicals is goitrogens. So goiter is thyroid disease. So goitrogens inhibit the absorption of iodine, which the thyroid really depends on to function properly. And there's information in the American Family Physician website. They say that 1 in 300 people in the United States are diagnosed with hypothyroidism, and that's considered a disease state. So hypothyroidism is very difficult to diagnose. So, do you think it's possible that there's a lot of people out there that are undiagnosed, that have an underperforming thyroid, that haven't crossed into the disease state, but they have thyroid issues with hypothyroidism nonetheless? Absolutely. And that makes hypothyroidism a pretty big problem. So there are plants out there that people in that category would do well to avoid. One of the plant categories would be cruciferous vegetables. That includes arugula, cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, kale, Brussels sprouts, collard greens, radishes, and turnips. Another family of plant-based foods that somebody with hypothyroidism would be do well to stay away from would be the rosacea family, and that is almonds, apricots, cherries, peaches, pears, plums, raspberries, and strawberries. And another category that is a goitrogen is nightshades, which are potatoes, tomatoes, peppers, and eggplant. All of the nightshade vegetables all have alkaloids that can be problematic for people with an underactive thyroid. And soy is another problem food for hypothyroidism. According to Dr. Isabella Wendt, who specializes in Hashimoto's, which is autoimmune hypothyroidism, she had a survey done with over 2,300 people, and those people all had Hashimoto's, and 63% said they felt better after removing soy, and 34% had a reduction in thyroid antibodies after removing soy. So that's a pretty huge effect. I mean, if you had a drug that would do that, it'd be a very popular drug to treat hypothyroidism. But people will accomplish that just by eliminating soy in their diet. So why do those people have those reactions? Well, they have some type of a weakened or compromised ability to handle those plant toxins that are contained in the vegetables that I mentioned and the fruits as well. Another category of plant chemicals, plant defense chemicals, would be oxalates. They're found in green leafy vegetables, tea, beans, nuts, and beets. Another category of plant chemicals are phytates. They're found in whole grains, seeds, legumes, and some nuts, and they can decrease the absorption of iron, zinc, magnesium, and calcium. And another category are saponins. They're found in legumes, and they will not only bind to iron and zinc and vitamin E and prevent the absorption of those important nutrients, they'll also inhibit digestive enzyme activity, further limiting absorption of other key nutrients. So that's an issue. Another category is tannins. Tannins are found in tea and coffee and legumes, and they can decrease iron absorption. And of course, we all know that iron is super important. It's used to make red blood cells. Energy issues involved with iron deficiency. Those are some pretty big deals there, folks. And so the point I'm trying to make here is plants are part of a healthy diet, yes, but should they be exclusively what we eat? I don't think so. And if you're having health issues, you may want to consider some of the problems associated with plants. Another problem associated with plant based diets are protein deficiencies that can develop. Proteins are made up of amino acids, and our bodies can make many of the amino acids that we need, but there are 9 essential amino acids that we need to get from our food. And that's why they're called essential, because if the body has those 9, it can make the others that we need. And if a food has all 9 amino acids, we refer to that as a complete protein source. Here's the problem. It's difficult to find a plant-based food that has all 9 essential amino acids that's a complete protein. Soy is a complete protein, but there's problems associated with eating soy. We just talked about a few of them. The plant defense chemicals are one. If it's not organic, it's almost certainly genetically modified. And the reason why they genetically modify soy is so that they can spray more chemicals on the crops. They spray pesticides and herbicides on there, so you'll be intoxicating yourself with those chemicals. But even if you do eat organic soy, soy acts as a xenoestrogen in the body. In other words, it mimics estrogen. And supplementing with estrogen can be very harmful if your estrogen levels are already at normal levels. So that's a problem. So remember, soy is a bean, which is a seed, and it's in the legume family. And we just discussed about just about every one of the chemicals we just talked about, those plant defense chemicals we just mentioned. Legumes was in that category. So they've got a lot of plant defense chemicals in there. Good reason to avoid them or at least limit them. Now, you can get complete proteins from combining plant based foods such as rice and beans, pita and hummus. You could even get a complete protein meal from a peanut butter sandwich with Ezekiel bread, which has a number of different ingredients in it. But that's challenging to get all the protein you need to get complete protein sources eating exclusively a plant based diet. It's quite challenging. So, why go through all that bother when you can get complete protein sources in and of themselves, such as meat, poultry, fish, eggs, and dairy? They're all complete protein sources by themselves. It makes getting your nutrients far easier. So, the bottom line is this: these plant defense chemicals are toxins, and they bind to certain key nutrients and prevent their absorption by the body. And those toxins are poisonous chemicals that cause digestive upset and also autoimmune conditions and inflammation. And that inflammation is systemic, which means it's all over your body. That means your brain is inflamed, your heart, all your vital organs get inflamed, especially your digestive tract. Inflammation there will lead to leaky gut and cause all kinds of problems with autoimmune and everything else. So you might be saying right about now, well, Dave, I'm sure all that's true. I know you've done your homework on this, but most people seem to be able to handle those plant toxins fairly well. And if a vegetarian is combining their foods, what's the problem? Well, you might feel like you're getting away with tolerating these plant chemicals for a period of time, but the trouble is that ends up being a burden to the body, and that burden is something the body has to deal with in some way, shape, or form. So here's how it works. Our bodies know how to thrive. We don't have to teach our cells how to do their jobs. They know how to thrive. Our default setting is health. That's what God gave us. God gave us a built in intelligence that we call vitalism, which means the body knows how to do its job. It knows how to heal. It knows how to build new cells. It knows how to detoxify and do all those things. Well, on a strictly plant based diet, you're going to be loading up in these plant defense chemicals. And you're also going to have nutrient deficiencies going on, including protein, vitamin A, D, and B12, and all that. And those serve as a burden to the body. And it's kind of like a boat dragging an anchor. You could look at it this way: if you were going to go on a long hike, let's say it's in the hills and you're going to go on a 10-mile hike, and you had a backpack on for some food and drinks, and I made you carry 25 pounds of rocks in your backpack, could you do the hike with that backpack on? Yes, you could. But that extra weight is going to be a burden, right? It's going to slow you down and wear you out more quickly. So you'd rather not have to carry the rocks, right? So if you got rid of the rocks, it would enhance your performance on the hike. In the same way, you're better off, your body is better off not having to deal with the burden of these nutrient deficiencies and these plant chemicals. So you're better off, your body is better off, and it would prefer not to deal with that burden. And you lighten your load a little bit by not ingesting those plant defense chemicals on a regular basis. Your vitality will be enhanced. So another objection that comes up quite frequently is, well, what about all the people that went vegetarian and saw a dramatic improvement to their health? There's all kinds of anecdotal evidence out there online. Well, we should expect to see that, because if someone is eating a standard American diet that is 80 to 90% processed foods, and they switch to a non-processed whole foods diet, they will likely see some improvements to their health. That's no surprise, whether it's plant-based, carnivore, or something in between, Mediterranean, who cares? Paleo. If you're going to switch from processed foods to non-processed foods, you're going to see some improvements to your health. So what happens is this happens with someone and they say, wow, I feel so much better. This is it. This is the diet everyone's been looking for. I'm going to tell the world about it. So they do. It sounds very convincing, but here's what happened. Their bodies experienced a short term therapeutic effect from eating that way, but that doesn't mean they should keep eating that way. You can experience a short term therapeutic effect by stopping eating altogether. I had a guy on the show, his name is Chris Gibson. He wrote a book called Acne Free in 3 Days. He did a 3-day fast and he solved his lifelong challenge with acne. And he did that by discontinuing all food. But that doesn't mean he should stay eating that way for the rest of his life. If he did, he wouldn't have to do it very long, because the rest of his life wouldn't last too long if he didn't start eating again, right? So just because someone experienced a benefit from making some changes to their diet doesn't mean they should stay on that for the rest of their lives. So you might be saying, but Dave, why does everyone say vegetables are healthy? Now, I know this is not a popular message. I know it's hard to really buy into this. I had a hard time buying into this myself. It took me years to come to the point where I understand what I do. The reason why so many people are advocating a plant based diet is because we've had the lipid hypothesis shoved down our throats for so many years that it starts to sound true. And if you're not familiar, here's what the lipid hypothesis is: a saturated fat is solid at room temperature. So if we took something like beef tallow, put it in a jar, which is beef tallow is mostly saturated fat, and we put it in a jar, set it on the shelf, at room temperature, it'll be solid and it'll be sticky. So if we heated that jar up and turned that fat into a liquid, and we poured that liquid down our kitchen sink drain, and then we ran some cold water in down the drain to wash it down, that fat would once again turn into a solid and it would stick to the inside of the pipes in our drain. Well, those that would advocate the lipid hypothesis say, yeah, that's exactly what happens inside our bodies. When we eat saturated fat, it starts to accumulate and stick to the inside of our arteries, and that's what causes plaque and therefore atherosclerosis and heart disease. Well, that is an oversimplification. Our arteries are not a sink drain, and our bodies are not a test tube. Our bodies are far more complicated and sophisticated than that. To think that our arteries are going to behave like a old kitchen sink drain is scientific reductionism to the extreme. Our anatomy and physiology is prepared to digest and assimilate those fats in a healthy way. It doesn't just pass through the digestive system, pass through the liver, and end up in the bloodstream and stick to our arteries. That's an extreme oversimplification. It's just simply not true. It doesn't work that way. When you study anatomy and physiology, like I did in my ND program, it's absolutely fascinating. It's awe-inspiring. When you learn what the body can do, how magnificent it is, how really just there's so much divine design to our bodies, and the fact that they're living and alive and there's that built-in intelligence, it'll take your breath away. Really, it's staggering how complex and amazing our bodies are. But repetition breeds belief, and we've heard the lipid hypothesis articulated so many times that we've come to believe it. And the medical field has pretty much accepted it as established fact. And the lipid hypothesis has always been just that, a hypothesis that's never been proven. And in fact, we have a lot of evidence these days to disprove it. And I'm going to be doing another whole episode on saturated fat and cholesterol. Jeff's follow-up question was on cholesterol and statin drugs and what we should do about that. So the next episode, I'm going to be addressing that in more depth. So that's not the only reason that we hear the lipid hypothesis being articulated so often. It's not difficult at all to find studies in the published medical literature that says that plant-based diets are good for heart health. And those studies are what organizations like the American Heart Association and government agencies like the USDA, United States Department of Agriculture, those organizations, the people that work there, they use those studies to make their dietary recommendations. But here's the problem. Those studies are mostly, almost exclusively, observational epidemiology. So what's epidemiology? It's the study of how often diseases occur in different groups of people and why. They're not randomized controlled trials. A randomized controlled trial has a much higher scientific standard than an observational study. And it's important to understand the difference. So let me just briefly explain this. In an observational study, the researchers don't control anything. They have people fill out surveys, then the researchers make their observations, they look for patterns, and then they draw their conclusions. You might say, well, what's wrong with that, Dave? It sounds scientific enough. Well, here's the problem. It's difficult, if not impossible, to isolate a single variable with those studies. They're painting with a really wide brush because there's all kinds of confounding variables in an observational study. What's a confounding variable? It's when something is associated with the results, but actually had nothing to do with it. So the classic explanation is this: is let's say you have a heat wave. Well, when the weather gets warmer, more people are going to go to the beach, more people are going to be in the water, and ice cream cone sales on the beach will go up. Well, it wouldn't be hard to conduct an observational study and say, well, we've seen a strong positive association between ice cream sales and shark attacks. Well, did the ice cream sales have anything to do with the shark attacks? Of course not. But it would show a strong correlation in an observational study. That's an example of a confounding variable. And observational studies are just loaded with confounding variables. They're just numerous, and they create a lot of noise and they create smokescreen. It's kind of like the researchers are driving into the sun looking through a dirty windshield. It's very hard to see what's in front of them. And it's kind of hard to see the forest for the trees sometimes. That's what's going on with these observational studies. Now, to contrast that with a controlled trial, there you minimize the confounding variables and you minimize the personal bias that the researchers are bringing in. Now, you can't ever eliminate either one, but you reduce them greatly with a randomized controlled trial. Now, here's how these studies are set up. You have a large group of people, and you take that large group and you divide them into two separate groups. One's called the control group, and the other is called the intervention group. Now, if you're going to study nutrition, the control group would continue eating the same diet they've always eaten, no changes. But the intervention group, they would have one variable changed, right? And then you would monitor those two groups for a period of time, compare the results, and the difference would be the impact that one variable had on that group of people. This way, you're painting with a much narrower brush. You're drilling down on that specific variable, and it reduces confounding, it minimizes bias, and it's far more scientific and far more reliable. But here's the problem: those studies are a lot more expensive and difficult to do. So researchers primarily rely on the cheaper, easier study, which is observational. And it's just, I could go into more on this, but it doesn't produce good science. Now, I'm not saying that everyone needs to stop eating vegetables. There are a lot of nutrients contained in vegetables. We'll get a lot of carbohydrates from plant based sources. Our bodies need carbohydrates. So I'm not saying that we need to stop eating vegetables altogether. I think that would be a mistake as well. Now, let me say this. If you are in extraordinary health, you have the ideal weight going on, you have great energy, great mood, you have no trouble sleeping, your mental cognition is where it needs to be, you're aging gracefully, you have great libido, you're enjoying physical activity, and when you do work out, you recover quickly. If all that's going on, man, you don't need a thing. You don't need my help. You're doing great. Keep doing what you're doing. But if you're someone that has some kind of a health challenge, particularly if it's a chronic one that the medical community has not been able to help you with, you may want to consider the idea that vegetables are not the universal health foods that we've been told. There are problems associated with a plant based diet, and vegetable consumption could be contributing to your issues. So the bottom line here is plant based versus animal based, which is better? Well, I think you know what I'm about to say. I lean towards animal based, hands down. But I want to make myself very clear on this. I'm not advocating a zero carbohydrate diet or even a low carb diet. I think that's a mistake as well. You end up with serious nutrient deficiencies there. You're going to have hormone imbalances. You're going to have thyroid issues staying on a zero carb diet. Can you experience a short term therapeutic effect from a zero carb diet? Yes, you can, and many people have, but that doesn't mean you should stay on it long term. And the same is true with plant based. You can experience short term beneficial effects, but you're going to set yourself up for nutrient deficiencies, and those nutrient deficiencies are likely to catch up with you over the long haul. So I'm recommending that we find the middle ground in that we consume quality protein, quality fat, and carbohydrate that our bodies prefer to make energy from, right? Um, we could probably have another whole episode on energy production. Our bodies prefer glucose for energy. We can use ketones for energy, burn fat for energy, but it's more difficult, and it's kind of our body's backup system. I believe we should be pressing into that kind of stress once in a while. I think we should be cycling in and out of glucose energy and ketone energy. But again, that's probably a topic for another episode. But I lean towards an animal-based diet. So getting back to Jeff's question on what should I eat for heart health? Well, Jeff, the number one thing you should do for heart health, as far as diet goes, is move away from processed foods. You want to severely restrict or eliminate linoleic acid that is found in seed oils. And if you stay away from processed foods, that will naturally happen because seed oils are in almost all processed foods. So, with that in mind, you've got to be very careful about eating out at restaurants because it's almost impossible to avoid seed oils when eating at a restaurant. So, eat at home more, be careful about what you're shopping for. Get away from the processed foods. Eat non-processed whole foods. That's the most important thing you can do. And again, I'm going to do a whole episode down the road on linoleic acid and why the seed oils should be avoided and why they're so toxic. One of the healthiest things anybody can do is to move away from seed oils. But we don't have time to get into that in this episode. But anyway, that's what you want to do, non-processed food. So what should our staples be? Well, I believe our staples should be meat and organs from ruminant animals. What's a ruminant? That's a cow, lamb, sheep, goat, bison, deer, or elk. Might be some more ruminants you could throw in there, but anyway, they're animals that graze out on the pasture and short green stuff growing in the ground. It's not just grass; they might eat clovers, those kinds of things. But those animals should be raised organically. They should be pastured, and they should be grass fed and grass finished. Now, I think there's some gains being played on the grass fed labeling in grocery stores because all cows are grass fed at some point in their lives. So, just about anybody that wants to can legally say this is grass fed beef. But remember, farmers will sell their beef by the pound and they want to fatten those cows up before slaughter. And the easiest way to fatten them up is to put them on a grain based diet. And so they'll move the cow off the pasture into a feedlot and fatten them up on a grain-based unnatural diet before they slaughter. And that beef is nowhere near as healthy, and it contains a lot more toxins than an animal that is raised on the pasture its entire life. It's grass-fed and grass-finished. They never consume grains. So that's what you want to look for when you're looking for beef or some type of ruminant beef or organs in the grocery store that is grass-fed and grass-finished. Now, pork and poultry are caution foods because a chicken, a turkey, or a pig, they're not ruminants. They're omnivores, and they don't have that complex digestive system like a ruminant does, where they can take an unhealthy fat and convert it into a healthy one for human consumption. So a poultry or a pig that is fed a feedlot-based diet, that feed is going to be corn and soy based. Why corn and soy based feeds? Because our federal government heavily subsidizes those crops, and it makes it way cheaper to feed your animals on that factory farmed feed than it is a natural diet. And when a non ruminant animal, an omnivore, consumes nothing but corn and soy that's high in linoleic acid, they don't have the digestive system to process that fat, and it ends up in their tissue. And when we eat that animal flesh, it ends up in our tissues because we don't have the digestive system to convert those fats either. So, pork and poultry are caution foods for that reason. Now, if you can find an enlightened farmer that understands this and feeds his poultry and pork a natural diet, which would consist of insects and worms and some grains and seeds, an omnivorous diet, well, then go for it. Those will be healthy foods for you. But it's kind of hard to find. You're probably going to have to find a local farmer. Now, I'm going to put some links in the show notes to some online sources where you can order healthy meats and cheese and those kinds of things, organs as well. Go to my website, davidsandstrom.com/138. I'll have links to some really good sources of online sources of meat and organs and cheese. Now, another category of food that we should be talking about is seafood. And seafood should be considered a caution food. Don't look at it as a staple because of mercury contamination. Mercury makes its way into the rivers and streams, and those flow to the ocean, and mercury accumulates there. And of course, it accumulates in the fish and the other creatures that live in the ocean. So I enjoy fish. They're great. They have high amounts of EPA and DHA, which are an important omega-3 fatty acid that's very health building. But what you want to do is eat fish that have fins and scales, and the smaller the fish, the better. Because of a process called bioaccumulation, the smaller fish will have smaller amounts of mercury in them, but then they get consumed by a larger fish, and a larger fish eats that, and a larger fish eats that. So the further up the food chain you go, the more the mercury will accumulate in that fish's tissue. So we want to stay with smaller fish if we can, sardines, anchovies. A salmon is considered one of the healthier fishes. Flounder, freshwater trout, herring. Stay away from tilapia. Tilapia is almost always farm raised. You can't get a wild caught tilapia in a restaurant. I've never seen it. And when these fish are raised in an unnatural environment, in a farming environment, they're basically living in their own poop. They're living in a cesspool. I never order tilapia at a restaurant. It's garbage. And by the way, you should eat wild caught fish. Farm raised is never as good. God's design is that a fish live in the ocean and in the wild, and they scavenge for their food, and they get their natural food, and that's the way a fish ends up being as healthy as they can be. They cannot duplicate that in a farming environment. It just can't happen. Even in the ocean, if they have a cage or a net blocked off, they still end up putting unnatural diet in that food, and poisons end up accumulating the bottom of where the fish are living, and it's extraordinarily toxic. So we stay away from farm-raised anything, eat wild-caught fish. Going up food chain a little bit, we have medium-sized fish like snapper and mahi-mahi, bluefish. Those are medium-sized fish, so the mercury content shouldn't be too bad. And then large fish and these fish would be the ones to avoid: swordfish, mackerel, marlin, tuna, shark. Stay away from those larger fish. They're going to have more mercury content in there. Shellfish and crustaceans, mercury content is generally a little lower than the larger fish. Crustaceans and shellfish would be shrimp, scallops, clams, oysters, mussels, squid. Again, caution foods. Enjoy them once in a while. If you enjoy seafood like I do, there are some ways we can fight back. If you take an activated charcoal or some type of a chelating agent before your meal, it will help bind the mercury and process it for elimination. I like this product right here. It's made by Quicksilver Scientific. It's called Ultra Binder. And you take a pack of this, which it looks like that, and you mix it in 8 ounces of water, and you drink that 30 minutes before your meal. And what it does is it binds to the mercury inside the digestive tract and eliminates it from the system. So it goes down the toilet the next day. So that's a good way to fight back. You can't get Quicksilver Scientific at the retail level. You have to get it from a practitioner. And you can do that if you go to my website, davidsandstrom.com/fullscript. Use my link there, create an account, and you'll have access to all of Fullscript's product lines, which include Quicksilver Scientific, which is an excellent brand, and I use it quite often myself. And you can lock in a 10% discount for life, and that's a good way to go. Another way we can fight back is to buy tuna that's been tested for mercury. And there's a brand out there, it's called Safe Catch Tuna. And they actually test their tuna right there on the boat when it's caught. And if there's a fish that happens to be really high in mercury, that fish is rejected and it's not used. Now, they don't guarantee that there's no mercury in there. That's pretty much impossible. That ship sailed a long time ago. There's no such thing as mercury-free tuna. It's not going to happen anymore. But this is the best we can do probably if you enjoy tuna. It's called Safe Catch. It's available at my Publix here in Georgia. We can get it. It's all over the place. So that's a couple of the ways that you can fight back. But don't consider seafood a staple. Our staple should be meat and organs from ruminant animals, and selectively choosing the right fruits and vegetables to enjoy with those. I also believe we should be eating eggs. Eggs should be organic, pasture-raised, and corn and soy-free, once again, because a chicken is not a ruminant. They're an omnivore, and they don't have the digestion to properly handle those fats. So eggs should be from corn and soy-free chickens. Kind of hard to find. I'm going to put some links in the show notes. If you can find a local farmer, great. Now, as far as plants go, what are we going to consume there? Again, we're going to get our carbohydrates from plant-based sources and fruits of all kinds. Fruits are great. We can eat fruits raw. You generally don't have to cook them. And the fruit is the least heavily defended part of a plant. because the plant is essentially saying, you can eat my fruit, but you can't eat me. In fact, they want you to eat their seeds. Quick story. Um, I have a bunch of pine trees in my front yard, and they're kind of messy. They drop a lot of pine cones in the spring. And just a couple of weeks ago, I looked in my backyard and I saw these baby pine trees popping up all over the place. So I'm like, I do not want a backyard full of pine trees. So I went out there and I had to pull up over 400 pine trees. I counted them all. It was like 427 trees I pulled up. It was amazing. And I asked myself, how did the seeds from those pine cones in my front yard get back here into my backyard? Well, what happened was nature was working just the way it was supposed to. The squirrels would eat the seeds from the pine cones. Then the squirrel would make his way into the backyard, poop those seeds out because the seeds are so heavily defended. They survived through the digestive tract, and then they pooped them out in the backyard. And that pile of poop has the perfect fertilizer for that seed to germinate and sprout and start a baby pine tree. Nature was working exactly the way it's supposed to. But understand I'm sharing that story to let you know that these seeds are a more heavily defended part of a plant, but not so in fruit. Fruit seeds are not as harmful because the plant or the tree wants you to eat their fruit for that reason. Okay. Another plant-based source I think we should be consuming and getting some complex carbohydrates from is root vegetables. Root vegetables are underground, therefore they're less heavily defended. Root vegetables includes potatoes of all varieties, carrots,
Carrots.
turnips, beets, radishes, ginger. What you want to do is peel them and cook them in a pressure cooker. That will reduce the lectin content. And here's another category of foods, kind of a fun name, cucurbitaceae. The cucurbitaceae family is pumpkin, squash, melons, and cucumbers. Once again, peel the skin, remove the seeds if you can, and cook them in a pressure cooker. Unless you're super sensitive to lectins, you should be in good shape with root vegetables. Now, if you don't have a food sensitivity to dairy, I say go for it. Feel free to enjoy dairy. Now, fermented dairy is better than drinking straight milk because the fermentation process breaks down some of the troublesome compounds in there. Lactose, which is a milk sugar, gets broken down with fermentation, and casein, which is a problematic protein a lot of people have trouble digesting, also gets partially broken down during the fermentation process. So I prefer to have my dairy fermented. Where you can get fermented dairy, of course, is cheese, kefir, which is a drinkable yogurt, and of course, yogurt itself. Don't get the flavored variety. Get plain whole milk yogurt and sour cream. It's also a fermented dairy product. Raw dairy is better than pasteurized dairy because when milk is pasteurized, they heat it up to high temperatures. That heat denatures some of the dairy proteins, and it's not as useful to the body. A little bit more difficult to digest. If you do have trouble digesting dairy, go with the fermented variety. And if that's still not enough for you, if you're still having trouble, you can try A2 milk. A2 is a type of protein in milk that's a lot easier to digest than A1. An A1 cow is what most of milk is in a grocery store shelf is A1, A2. A2 cows are A2, A2, and that's a type of protein. It's based on their genetics that's easier to digest. So if you're still having trouble with dairy, even if you go fermented, try A2 milk. It might be easier. And by the way, goat milk is all A2 protein. Goat milk is always easier to digest than cow milk. So getting back to raw milk, so raw is better than pasteurized, but the problem is in most states, selling raw milk for human consumption is illegal. There's a few states that it is legal. South Carolina, California come to mind, but in most states it's illegal to sell raw cow milk for human consumption. If it's labeled for pet consumption only, then it's legal. You might be able to find a store that does that. Sprouts Farmers Market here in Georgia does that. Sells it. They sell it labeled for pet consumption only. That's one way to get raw dairy. Another way people get raw dairy is they join a cow share program. So you have a farmer that's willing to raise the cow, and you buy a portion of that cow with some other people as well. So you go to the farm, and the farmer will give you some of the milk from your cow. You're not buying the milk from him. You're getting the milk from the cow that you own, and that's legal. So that's what I think about dairy. As far as what we should be drinking mostly water. I like reverse osmosis water. Spring water is best, but if you can't get that, it's kind of expensive. Reverse osmosis that's been remineralized is probably your second best option. Foods that we should avoid, I said it already, seed oils. Number one thing, get away from processed food, get away from seed oils. That's the number one thing anyone can do to improve their diet, especially if you're concerned with heart health. Reduce or eliminate grains. Grains are problematic for a lot of people. They're high in carbohydrate. Some people, when they eat a piece of toast, their blood sugar spikes higher than a bowl of ice cream. It's just not a health food. That's the truth. I'm just trying to share the truth with you guys. I'm knowing the bearer of bad news here. A lot of people love their bread. I saw this in my practice when I was doing my nutritional counseling, and that is most people will experience improvements to their health if they drastically restrict or eliminate grains. Nuts, also problematic for a lot of people, seeds, and legumes. Now, here's an important point. I know this can sound kind of restrictive, and I don't want your diet to be restrictive. That's no fun. We should be having fun with our food. We should enjoy our meals, especially with friends and family. So don't become a part of a diet cult. Don't put yourself in a silo and say, look, this is the way it has to be. I'm zero carb. I'm carnivore. I'm plant-based only. I'm vegan. Those are extremes that are really not a lot of fun and far too restrictive. Don't voluntarily put yourself in a silo with extreme dietary limitations. That's not a good idea. If you're out with some friends and they serve some dinner rolls before dinner and you have one, then you're beating yourself up for the next week because you broke your diet and you went outside the guidelines and you had that toast. Well, if you do that, if you beat yourself up with guilt after doing something like that, that stress is more harmful to you than that food ever would have been. All right. So if you're going to a birthday party, have a piece of cake and some ice cream. Go ahead and enjoy with your friends. You're at a New Year's Eve celebration, have a glass of champagne. Enjoy life, enjoy your friends. Don't be that person that's so rigid that you deprive yourself of the health benefits of relational connectedness because of your extreme dietary restrictions. That's not a good way to live. And by the way, relational connectedness is very good for your health. So, bottom line here is eating does not have to be totally restrictive. You can have a lot of fun and find some delicious, nutritious foods following the guidelines that I've laid out in these two episodes. That's it. Have fun. Enjoy your food and improve your health. So I want you to be sure to tune in for the next episode where I'm going to be tackling Jeff's follow-up question. And he asked me about cholesterol and whether or not we should be trying to lower it with statins. It's a fascinating topic, one, again, that there's a lot of confusion on, and I'm going to tackle that on the next episode. So tune in for that. Again, if you've got a question and you want me to address it on a future Ask Me Anything episode, go to my website, davidsandstrom.com/AMA. That stands for Ask Me Anything. Click on the button there. You can leave me a 90-second voice message, and I'll do my best to answer your question on another upcoming episode. If you're getting value out of this show, would you leave me a rating and review on Apple or Spotify? It helps people make their decision as to whether or not, if they find the show, they're wondering, well, is this show going to be worth listening to? And if they see some honest reviews, ratings and reviews on Apple and Spotify, that helps people with that decision. So it helps put this really life-saving information in other people's hands. So I would appreciate that. And then lastly, if you're enjoying the show, you're finding value here, would you tell a friend? I would appreciate that very much. And I think your friend would appreciate it too. That's it for now. Thanks for listening. I appreciate you. Be blessed.